A cyber grizzly lifts an entire dam. The waterfall becomes an apocalypse curtain. Deep inside a crimson hive, human floodlights drown in bioluminescent eons. A golden siren pirouettes. Jewels burst like meteors while a deaf knight stares, the audience hearing blood pound in his stead. That's the flavor of the 5 shorts we're about to unpack. There's a Special Forces squad caught in a meat grinder, courtesy of a Pentagon-funded robo-bear. A pair of academics who try to farm an alien superhive and end up on its menu. A Scottish farmer locked in guerrilla warfare with evolution-level rats who build crossbows and funeral pyres. An elite unit stumbling into a cave that doubles as a cosmic prison. And a conquistador-era soldier stripping treasure off a lovesick siren until greed literally bursts his eardrums. 5 wildly different bullets, but they're all aimed at the same bullseye. Every time we grab for control, over tech, nature, culture, belief, or straight-up lust, we set the timer on a bomb wired to our own egos. Here's the hook that keeps me up at night. Season 3's back half looks like random chaos, but the showrunners almost tied it together with one brutal prophecy. Studio gossip says Netflix fought hard to place Hibaro in the final slot because, in an early cut, each episode dropped breadcrumbs toward a single warning about how fast power flips on its wielder. Most of those hints were yanked before release. Nobody's officially explained why. Maybe the message hit a nerve. Maybe it spoiled the fun by pointing too clearly at us. So that's the rabbit hole we're diving down. We'll sift through the DNA of each short, its color schemes, camera tricks, buried symbols, and see how they link up under the skin. We'll talk shop about the directors, the near-deleted shots, and the budget meltdowns that shaped what finally hit your screen. Most of all, we'll chase that missing prophecy and ask the only question worth asking. When story warns its own creators to back off, who's really in charge, the storyteller or the story? 5 shorts, 5 separate threads, but the writer's room stitched them with the same 2 notes Tim Miller kept hammering. Things spin out of control, and the stuff we thought was dead comes roaring back. Kill Team Kill started as live action until director Jennifer Yanelson priced out the water dam explosion and laughed. Blur Studios pivoted to a chunky 2.5D look that channels heavy metal and Saturday Night VHS score. The Robo-Bear's steel fur feels spray-painted on your TV screen, a happy accident born of budget panic. Swarm adapts Bruce Sterling's 1982 story. Miller took the helm himself, refusing to sand down its bleak punchline. Humans get demoted to worker drones. Test audiences call the original ending a brick wall of despair, so Netflix yanked Swarm's big lecture on galactic extinction and let Simon Screams do the talking. Mason's Rats comes from Neil Asher, but novelist Joe Abercrombie rewrote it and slipped in the whiskey barrel ceasefire. The first cut killed Mason off. Execs wanted at least one feel-good beat, so Carlos Stevens dressed his militant rodents in Highland Regiment jackets, an Easter egg about empires eating their peasants. For In Vaulted Halls Entombed, Jerome Chun partnered with Sony Imageworks to demo Unreal Engine rendering in real time. Night vision fog, gun muzzle bloom, and those eerie cave spotlights all streamed straight off the GPU farm, which nearly melted its cooling system. The Harper carves out her own eyes. Shot almost got axed. They pitched it as blue ink tears to the standards board and squeaked by. Finally, Hibaro is Alberto Mielgo unleashed. Dancer Sebastian Matos wore a full mocap suit in a pool, while 24 GoPros bobbed underwater to capture every splash. Mielgo called it a liquid lens. Netflix fought to save Hibaro for the finale because the early plan had all 4 previous shorts dropping a matching gold trinket at the end, clues to one shared myth arc. That Easter egg died in post, leaving the siren to glow alone. Across episodes 5 through 9, one of the most intriguing developments isn't in the plot lines or the characters. It's in the eye that watches them. The camera doesn't just capture chaos. It becomes a participant, a mirror, and, in some cases, a co-conspirator. In these shorts, visual grammar isn't just decorative. It's diagnostic. It tells us how power shifts long before the script does. Let's start with Kill Team Kill. The visual style is blunt force trauma. Triangular compositions trap the soldiers in tight, militarized frames, always edged by danger. The cyber grizzly doesn't just show up, it bursts into frame from below like a missile misfiring out of the Earth's crust. Every time the bear lunges, the frame bleeds outward like a ruptured artery. Motion isn't horizontal or vertical, it's ballistic. The framing screams that this isn't a mission, it's a setup. The squad is framed like cannon fodder, not heroes. Then we hit Swarm, and everything liquefies. Suddenly, the camera glides. Dolly shots circle characters like a predator in zero gravity. Color grading shifts to deep marine blues and alien teals, as if the whole sequence takes place inside a womb, or maybe a sarcophagus. When the swarm queen appears, the lens tightens into a shrinking tunnel, like a pupil narrowing under threat. But here's the reversal. It's not just the humans watching the hive. The hive is watching back. And it's older, calmer, and has seen this curiosity before. Mason's rats plays like satire with a sniper's aim. On first glance, it looks claymation soft and homey, warm yellows, autumnal browns, low-contrast lighting, like a beer ad. But when the automated turret arrives, the color palette spikes. Saturation floods the screen like gasoline igniting on film. The entire look turns volatile, hyperreal, comic book grotesque. What begins as a countryman's pest problem spirals into a miniature allegory for the militarization of industry, and a reminder that AI doesn't need to be evil to be absurdly violent. In Vaulted Halls Entombed puts the lens into full survival mode. The camera breathes like a soldier, panting, twitching, scanning. Night vision green dominates the screen, not just as a style choice, but as an optical prison. We're locked into a way of seeing that's already broken. The shots become progressively more fragmented. Angles disorient. Light pulses like trauma trying to process itself. Every flashlight beam acts like a lie detector test, catching something the soldiers weren't supposed to find. And the moment Harper turns the camera away from her face, when she gouges out her own eyes, is when the frame finally settles. As if the story itself says, now you're ready to see. And then comes Ibaro. This short doesn't play by any previous rulebook. The camera is unchained, whiplash fast, always in motion, chaotic, but never random. Shot at 120 frames per second, it's less about choreography and more about immersion. You don't watch Ibaro, you fall into it. The lens catches water droplets, gold glints, and bone cracks with surgical clarity. At times, it feels like you're the third dancer in a pas de deux between a cursed knight and a siren who bleeds jewels. The camera turns into a fever dream of desire, consumption, and betrayal. Even when no one's speaking, the lens is screaming. In each short, characters begin the story thinking they have the upper hand over a weapon, a species, a nuisance, a myth. But over and over, that illusion collapses. And the collapse is where the real narrative lives. Sergeant Nielsen, in Kill Team Kill, wins by flooding a canyon, but what haunts him isn't the mission. It's that the monster was one of theirs. That bear wasn't an enemy. It was a product. He walks away not as a hero, but as a loose end in someone else's military experiment. Galena, the observer in Swarm, begins as a rational scientist and ends as a voice box for the hive. The twist. It's not possession, it's promotion. The hive didn't punish her. It upgraded her. Meanwhile, Simon, the so-called pioneer, gets physically dissected and emotionally erased, an intellectual colonizer turned into reproductive biomass. Mason's arc is deceptively wholesome. He doesn't change because the rats get smarter. He changes because he watches one of them stitch up a wounded friend. In that moment, the camera gives both Mason and the Rat King equal framing. Enemy and enemy share the same size, the same light. The war ends, not in victory, but in recognition. Harper's choice to blind herself in vaulted halls isn't defeat. It's transformation. She sees too much and decides the only way forward is to stop seeing like a soldier. In doing so, she becomes something in between, a vessel, a warning, maybe a god's pupil. In Hibaro, the knight and the siren are perfect mirrors. He can't hear. She can't stop singing. He strips her body. She leaks herself into his ears. In the end, the siren's blood cures his deafness, and her voice becomes his death sentence. It's not love, and it's not revenge, it's poetic reversal. The one man who couldn't be enchanted drowns in the sound he was never meant to hear. This season buries cultural and historical signals in costume design, props, and even camera movement. The Bear's microwave cannon in Kill Team Kill evokes Reagan's Star Wars program, weaponized defense wrapped in absurdity. The birthing spiral inside Swarm's hive mimics deep space nebulae, evolution as recursion, biology echoing cosmology. The rats in Mason's rats wave a green-plaid battle flag, a visual call-out to 19th century Scottish tenant revolts. The chains in vaulted halls are patterned after Egyptian funerary icons, especially the arms of Anubis, death as containment, gods as jailers. In Hibaro, the siren's gold-plated skin is studded with Spanish colonial coins, real currency from the era of New World conquest. The knight doesn't just rob her. He's reclaiming empire and paying for it in blood. If part 1 was about how these shorts look, then part 2 is about how they unfold, and how that unfolding isn't random. These aren't just one-off experiments thrown into an anthology blender. The storytelling structures behind episodes 5 to 9 are deliberate, strategic, and often counterintuitive. They set traps for the viewer, narrative setups that detonate only after the credits roll. Let's unpack 3 layers of narrative engineering. How time is manipulated, how point of view is withheld or distorted, how theme is refracted across episode order. Almost every short here messes with temporal expectation, not by bending time in a sci-fi way, but by how it paces the viewer's understanding. The effect is emotional whiplash, or sometimes worse, a creeping realization that you were complicit in something you didn't catch until too late. Take Swarm. It opens as a curiosity box, sci-fi researchers poking at alien biology. Classic first contact structure. But halfway through, the tempo collapses. Dialogue slows. The hive becomes still. The moment Simon thinks he's in control is the moment the story stops moving. And that's not a glitch, it's a cue. Time slows to imply that human agency has hit a wall. Everything after that is denouement masquerading as climax. Contrast that with Kill Team Kill, which burns like a fuse. It's a countdown structure disguised as a survival story. The first beat hits with a joke, the next with blood. From there, the episode becomes a sprint toward entropy. There's no breathing room, no reversals. Just escalation. The pacing is the joke. By the time the bear explodes, the only thing left standing is the punchline. We made this. We can't stop it. In Hibaro, time is syncopated. The camera jumps and jerks. The edits arrive mid-motion, like someone dropped a film reel into a blender. But pay attention to the moments when the visuals slow, when the night picks up the gold, when the siren screams into silence, when blood clouds the lake. Those are not just beats, they're breaks in time. Emotional time, moral time, mythic time. And when the knight hears again, time resets for a moment before drowning him for good. Who gets to tell the story? All 5 shorts play tricks with perspective, what we see, what we don't, and who we're allowed to identify with. In Vaulted Halls, Entomb gives us a familiar frame, soldiers on a mission, seen through their own tech, bodycams, drones, HUDs. But none of that tech can see the real danger. In fact, it hides it. The deeper they go, the less helpful their tools become. By the time we hit the ancient being, the camera has turned traitor. The frame lingers too long. The angles go crooked. Even the lighting stops obeying logic. Harper's final act, blinding herself, is not an escape from horror. It's a return to honesty. A broken perspective is better than a manipulated one. Mason's Rats flips perspective through tone. The episode starts like a Pixar short with a shotgun. We're meant to laugh. But when the rats hold a funeral, the tone swerves. We're no longer laughing with Mason. We're watching him be watched. The rats get rituals, emotions, even camera angles once reserved for protagonists. And by the end, the story isn't his. It's theirs. He just gets to live in it. Hibaro is the most radical. The knight has no voice, no thoughts. He's a mute witness like us. The Sire, meanwhile, has a full emotional arc with 0 dialogue. She's expressive through motion, color, rhythm. It's the most anti-narrative of the batch, and yet it tells us the most. By removing traditional POV altogether, Hibaro forces the viewer to feel rather than follow. You're not understanding the story. You're drowning in it. It will be easy to think that episode order in an anthology series is arbitrary, especially since Netflix even experimented with randomized episode orders in Season 1. But these 5? They're sequenced like a slow spiral downward. Kill Team Kill opens with violent absurdity. It's over-the-top, nihilistic, hilarious. It says, you think this is just a fun gore fest? Cool. Let's start there. Then Swarm hits. And suddenly the cost of knowledge becomes flesh. Human ambition collapses into biological irrelevance. Next, Mason's Rats. Comic again, but darker. The line between pest and peer becomes disturbingly thin. In Vaulted Halls follows. Hope disappears. Human logic fails. Myth devours mission. Perspective fractures. And finally, Hibaro. The grand finale. The aesthetic climax. But narratively? A free fall. There's no dialogue, no logic, just sensation, blood, beauty, and betrayal. It ends not on a resolution, but on a death rattle. This descent, this journey from satire to horror to lyric tragedy, is designed, and it has a cumulative effect. Each episode weakens our grip on certainty. By the time the screen fades to black after Hibaro, we're not just questioning what happened. We're questioning whether we ever knew what was happening in the first place. These 5 shorts sparked some of the most polarized debates in entire Love, Death and Robots fanbase, and beyond. Critics praised Hibaro as a visual and sonic masterpiece, but others called it incoherent, even pretentious. Was it cultural critique, or just trauma porn in gold paint? Some reviewers hailed Swarm as Sterling's best adaptation to date. Others were furious at the omission of the Hive's final monologue, a choice that turned a cosmic parable into a body horror closeout. Mason's rats drew ire for trivializing AI militarization, while others saw it as necessary comic relief in a season drowning in existential dread. And in Vaulted Halls? Some loved its commitment to Lovecraftian horror. Others dismissed it as undercooked and overly reliant on tropes, ignoring that the very tropes were being used to show the limits of our tools and vision. But here's what's more interesting than any of those takes. What if the point of this 5-act structure isn't narrative clarity, but emotional erosion? Each story strips something away. First comfort, then control, then perspective, then reason, and finally language itself. You don't walk away with answers. You walk away with a different way of seeing. What links a death bear, a hyper-intelligent hive, a whiskey-drunk farmer, a blind soldier, and a glittering corpse bride of a siren? On the surface, not much. These are vastly different genres: military satire, cosmic horror, claymation farce, eldritch thriller, operatic fantasy. But zoom out far enough, and they all become chapters in the same cautionary myth. When power is misread as wisdom, and dominance as destiny, collapse is not a bug, it's the operating system. This part of the analysis isn't about cinematography or storytelling mechanics. It's about what's underneath the storyboards, the historical trauma, social hierarchies, and systemic delusions that shape the architecture of each world and mirror our own. Who holds power? And who pays? In each short, there's a power structure in place. Sometimes it looks like a chain of command. Sometimes it's a corporate lab. Sometimes it's just a man with a rifle and a grudge. But in every case, the person or system in control begins by assuming superiority and ends up either destroyed or transformed beyond recognition. Let's start with Kill Team Kill. At first glance, it's just a dark military cartoon. But the real joke is that everyone in the story is following orders issued by a system they can't see. The cyber bear wasn't dropped in by aliens. It was built by their own side. It's a closed loop of command and instruction, where the enemy is indistinguishable from the employer. That's not sci-fi. That's every war ever labeled a defense initiative. Swarm is even more brutal. It takes the colonial logic of, if we discover it, we deserve to own it, and feeds it to a hive that doesn't care. Simon, the human scientist, believes he's found a blank slate to exploit, raw, unclaimed life ripe for harvesting. But he's not the first. The hive has buried thousands like him. Its evolutionary memory spans civilizations. His attempt to manipulate it isn't innovation. It's historical repetition. He's not a pioneer. He's a rerun. Then there's Mason's rats. It may look like comic relief, but it's quietly one of the most politically loaded episodes of the season. Mason doesn't just wage war on rodents. He uses a defense contractor to do it. His farm, his crops, his property, these are the justifications. But the rats are no longer pests. They've developed culture. They build, they bury, they grieve. In a single shot, a rat medic tying off a wounded comrade's stump, the story pivots. The rats aren't vermin. They're insurgents. And suddenly, Mason isn't a victim. He's an occupying force in a war he didn't know he started. In Vaulted Halls, Entomb takes this even further. The power structure is cosmic. The soldiers are pawns. The enemy is a mythic force that predates language. But the setup is the same. Humans assume they're the apex species. They have tech, tactics, training. They have belief systems. And none of it matters. Because the thing they uncover isn't something you kill, it's something you kneel to. The horror here isn't the monster. It's the realization that you were never in charge to begin with. And Hibaro, that's a whole empire's worth of power imbalance distilled into a ballet of blood and gold. The Conquistador Knight strips the siren not just of jewels, but of identity, agency, and sovereignty. He turns her body into currency. But she's not helpless. Her blood restores his hearing, so she can destroy him with what makes her most dangerous, not violence but voice. The colonizer is undone not by a rival army, but by the very beauty he tried to own. Is this about one person or all of us? The brilliance of these shorts isn't just that they show bad things happening to arrogant people. It's that they show how those people are generated by systems. You could swap out Nielsen for another soldier, Simon for another scientist, Mason for another landowner. The story would still unfold the same way. That's because each short lays out a structure of power and then lets that structure implode. Not from sabotage, but from following its own rules to their logical conclusion. The soldiers in vaulted halls don't die because they disobeyed. They die because they obeyed too well. Simon doesn't fail because he's reckless. He fails because he thinks evolution will make room for him. Mason only finds peace when he stops fighting the progress he thought he needed. These aren't isolated tragedies. They're design failures. Each story reveals a kind of cultural operating system: military obedience, colonial ambition, consumer automation, techno-faith, extractive masculinity. And each one collapses not when it's resisted, but when it's allowed to run unchecked. Here's where it gets uncanny. All 5 shorts rewire ancient myth structures to diagnose contemporary disasters. Kill Team Kill is a reskin of the Prometheus myth. Mankind builds a monster it can't control and pays in fire and blood. Swarm is Eden inverted. The tree of knowledge is the swarm, and eating from it doesn't grant wisdom. It gets you rewritten. Mason's Rats is Animal Farm in reverse. The animals become more human, and it's the humans who have to evolve to catch up. Vaulted Halls is the Book of Revelation through a thermal scope. A soldier opens the wrong door and finds the god behind the curtain. Hibaro is Orpheus and Eurydice, drowned in colonial loot. He looks back. She screams. They both go under. But these aren't just clever rewrites. They're warnings. By tapping into archetypal stories, the shorts remind us that the struggles we see between dominance and dignity, progress and destruction aren't new. What's new is the technology that masks them as something else. What's new is the scale. And that's the point. Our myths haven't evolved, but our weapons have. At some point, each story stops feeling like fiction and starts to feel like something you've seen before. The Pentagon-funded bear in Kill Team Kill isn't far from real-life AI drones trained to kill without human oversight. The forced breeding and caste systems in Swarm echo eugenics debates and fears of biotech being used for social control. The rat war in Mason's Rats echoes labor disputes, land rights battles, and resistance to agricultural automation. Vaulted Halls reads like a parable about climate change. Dig too deep, and you wake something that can't be put back. Hibaro? That's the entire history of conquest, plundering beauty, silencing resistance, and drowning in the very richness that was stolen. And here's the terrifying through line. In every case, the story ends after the point of no return. The damage is already done. There's no redemption arc. No tech fix. No triumphant escape. That's the moral spine of this sequence of episodes. We always think we're the hero of the story, until the story eats us. If the last section was about who holds power, this one is about who consumes it. Because make no mistake, these stories aren't just about soldiers, scientists, or sirens. They're also about us. Not just as viewers, but as participants in the systems these stories are dissecting. This is the part of the analysis where the camera turns. Not toward the characters, toward the audience. Who's actually responsible? Let's talk complicity. In Kill Team Kill, it's easy to laugh at the absurdity of a death bear laced with microwave cannons and CIA insignia. But step back for a second. That bear is a tax-funded murder bot. Its creation isn't satire. It's a reflection of very real conversations happening in Pentagon boardrooms, DARPA labs, and defense contractor R&D divisions. And when it rampages through its own creators, the point isn't just irony. The point is, no one stopped it. No one said no. The bear exists because enough people along the chain said, sure, why not? That chain includes us. Every time we ignore a headline about experimental warfare, every time we vote with our wallets for security over humanity, we help build that bear. We might not push the launch button, but we're definitely paying the electricity bill. The same goes for Swarm. Simon isn't evil. He's curious. Visionary. A little arrogant, maybe, but his intentions aren't monstrous. He wants to advance humanity. But embedded in that goal is a quiet brutality, the assumption that progress requires domination. And Galena, she doesn't stop him. She's there. She sees what's coming. But she watches, detached, analytical. By the time she gets pulled into the hive's will, it's already too late. Sound familiar? It should. Because that's how most systemic tragedies unfold, not through malicious intent, but through passive consent. through people who knew better and stayed on the sidelines. Mason's Rats might seem like a tonal detour, a bit of comic relief between the body horror and existential dread, but look again. That story is about a man who delegates violence to a machine, and then acts surprised when the machine exceeds the contract. It's a critique not just of militarized tech, but of the automation of responsibility. Mason doesn't kill the rats himself. He just signs the paperwork. So let's ask the uncomfortable question. How different is that from how we engage with entertainment? How often do we consume stories of violence, exploitation, and trauma under the banner of art, and then walk away when it cuts too close? In Vaulted Halls, Entombed is the most direct about this. The soldiers' POVs are filtered through body cams, night vision scopes, satellite feeds, exactly the kind of perspective we associate with modern military documentaries or war video games. We don't just watch these soldiers die. We're given the tools to play them. The aesthetic says, here, you take the wheel. And when Harper finally turns away from the camera, literally denies the visual gaze, we're left stranded, blinded, disarmed. She's reclaiming her agency by refusing to be seen. In a season packed with escalating spectacle, this moment is one of profound silence. And it lands because the show knows exactly what it's doing. It's asking whether the viewer deserves the view. Nowhere is this dynamic more aggressively exposed than in Hibaro. Let's be honest, Hibaro is intoxicating to watch. The colors, the choreography, the music, or lack thereof. It's one of the most visually stunning short films ever made. But here's the sting. That's exactly what it's warning us about. This is a story about aestheticized violence, about beauty that kills, about spectators who consume without understanding. The Knight doesn't just strip the siren. He strips the narrative. He doesn't ask what she is. He doesn't try to understand. He just takes. And what do we do as viewers? We do the same. We marvel at her design. We pause on frames. We analyze the symbolism. We dissect her. We mine the spectacle for meaning. And we risk becoming the Knight. Because if we don't wrestle with what the story is doing, if we don't reflect on our role as consumers of trauma made beautiful, we're just watching conquest with a better color palette. That's why Hibaro had to be the final episode. Not just because it's the most technically ambitious, but because it turns the blade around. It doesn't let you leave clean. It tells you that your gaze is part of the damage. Where does moral responsibility land? Across all 5 shorts, one question hangs in the air like smoke after a detonation. When systems fail, who's to blame? Is it the creators? The executors? The bystanders? The beneficiaries? The military brass who built the bear? Or the soldiers who followed orders? The scientist who seeded the hive? Or the partner who watched in silence? The farmer who signed the turret contract? Or the vendor who sold it? The soldier who pulled the trigger? Or the camera operator who edited the footage? The Knight who took the jewels? Or the audience who called it beautiful? The truth is, everyone shares the weight. These aren't stories about lone villains. They're about networks of consent. About how easy it is to be just doing your job. About how responsibility gets diluted until no one feels it, but everyone's covered in blood. And that's the sharpest commentary of all. Not that systems fail, but that we design them to. We design them to reward silence. To punish hesitation. To optimize for speed, not wisdom. For profit, not consequence. There's a reason these episodes spark such polarized responses. Because they're not just asking, what does this mean? They're asking, what are you willing to look at, and what is your looking cost? Some viewers recoil. Some praise the craft and look away from a message. Some confront it and feel haunted. And the show wants that split. It's built for it. Love, Death, and Robots isn't moralistic. But it is moral. It gives you stories, not sermons. But those stories don't come without a bill. You want spectacle? Here's a war bear. Here's a corpse that dances. Here's an alien god whispering in tongues. You got what you asked for. Now, what are you going to do with it? By now, we've traveled from killer mechs to conquistador myths, from hive minds to automated war. But here's the twist that hits hardest. None of it feels like science fiction anymore. The 5 shorts we've been unpacking aren't just allegories. They're accelerants. They don't just warn us of what might come. They show us what's already here, under different names. This is the moment where analysis meets implication. Let's start with Kill Team Kill. At first glance, it's absurd, a cybernetic grizzly with microwave cannons and titanium bones. But shift your focus, and you'll see the bear isn't fantasy. It's a metaphor for real-world autonomous weapons already in production. As of 2025, over 90 countries are developing AI-driven military systems. From loitering drones that pick their own targets to robotic dogs with facial recognition and riot suppression gear, we're not just building machines that kill, we're building ones that choose who dies. And the moral framework? Still being debated. The Geneva Conventions were never written for algorithms. So who's liable when a killbot misidentifies a civilian? The programmer? The commanding officer? The nation-state? Kill Team Kill strips away the abstraction and shows us the endpoint. We unleash machines of war, and we're the ones who get mauled first. The bear is a warning, not a joke. And the punchline isn't funny. It's prophetic. Swarm feels like deep space body horror, but its roots are disturbingly local. Synthetic biology is already editing species for productivity. CRISPR lets us rewire DNA like code. Bioengineers are building modular organisms for pharmaceuticals, climate control, even artificial reproduction. But with that power comes an old temptation: control the future by redesigning life. Simon's speech about designing a cooperative species isn't radical, it's déjà vu. It echoes 20th century eugenics movements that targeted undesirable traits, often rooted in racism, classism, and ableism. What Swarm forces us to confront is the arrogance that sits beneath so much of biotech's narrative, the belief that intelligence entitles us to tinker. That complexity equals supremacy. That life is only valuable if it can be optimized. The hive doesn't resist Simon because he's evil. It resists him because he's predictable. He's the 1,000th outsider who came offering order. And it knows how that ends. Swarm asks us whether our pursuit of perfection is just a sophisticated form of conquest. It suggests that real intelligence doesn't compete, it adapts. And maybe that's why we keep losing. Mason's Rats is claymation, comedy, and Scottish whimsy, until it's not. The minute the rats bury their dead and salute their flag, the episode shifts. We're not watching pest control anymore. We're watching class conflict, automated violence against the underclass, and a landowner learning, far too late, that the line between infestation and resistance is mostly political. Look around. Amazon warehouse workers are monitored by AI systems that flag them for underperformance based on bathroom breaks. Gig workers fight algorithmic bosses they never meet. Farmers in India, Brazil, and the Midwest face equipment they can't fix without corporate permission because of software locks. People get evicted by automated court filings. Denied loans by opaque credit AIs. The turret in Mason's Rats is every system that promises efficiency at the cost of empathy. And Mason's awakening. That moment he sees the rat medic patching up a comrade, that's a call to consciousness. A reminder that recognition, not revenge, is the first step toward justice. The war isn't man versus machine. It's human indifference versus human dignity. In Vaulted Halls, Entombed might be the most metaphorically dense episode in the batch. A team of elite soldiers enters a cave under orders. They use cutting-edge gear. Their senses are extended, digitized, streamed, recorded. But none of that saves them. In fact, it blinds them. They think they're prepared. But the cave doesn't play by those rules. This isn't just a monster-in-the-dark story. It's a parable about what happens when systems built on surveillance and obedience meet something they can't map. The soldiers don't die because they're weak. They die because their tools only work inside the world they already understand. In real life, this happens every day. Facial recognition systems can't process non-Western faces or expressions. Predictive policing software reinforces racial profiling. Military drone operators mistake weddings for terror cells. Intelligence agencies drown in data they can't interpret until it's too late. We keep building systems that assume seeing is understanding. But Vaulted Halls reminds us, some knowledge isn't meant to be digitized. Some gods don't fit inside databases. And when Harper carves out her eyes, she's not just escaping. She's rejecting the entire premise that vision equals power. She's saying, if this is what knowing looks like, I'd rather be blind. Let's not sugarcoat this one. Hibaro is one of the most brutal and beautiful indictments of colonial logic ever animated. A deaf conquistador steals from a being he cannot understand, and in doing so, dooms himself. A siren made of treasure sings only to those she can destroy. They are predator and prey, mirror and wound. But the story isn't locked in the past. It's about the present. We still mine beauty from bodies. We still romanticize violence when it's exoticized. We still exploit what we fetishize and then call it tragic when it resists. Whether it's the tourism industry commodifying indigenous ceremonies, fashion labels profiting from cultural symbols, or governments silencing displaced communities while selling their land, Hibaro is everywhere. And the blood in the water, that's not metaphor. That's history. The final twist, when the knight regains his hearing and is instantly killed by the song he'd been immune to, might be the most poetic depiction of colonial blowback in any recent media. It says, "You don't get to take the voice and live." Are we too late? Each episode in this cluster contains a hypothetical future that's already trickling into the present. Not fully, not globally, but in fragments, in whispers, in prototypes and patents and policy drafts. We see it in defense contracts for AI drones, fertility markets gamifying gene selection, smart agriculture that displaces small farms, body cams replacing accountability with documentation. Natural wonders turned into profit machines and photo ops. These aren't plot devices. They're real. And the shorts don't ask if these futures are coming. They ask if we'll even notice them arriving. Or worse, if we'll welcome them in. So here's the hard question that the series, especially this back half, asks over and over again. If we already live in these systems, what are we willing to do to change them? Because tech won't save us from tech. The hive won't fix itself. The bear doesn't unbuild. The song doesn't unsing. If there's a solution implied in these stories, it isn't revolution. It's recognition. Of agency. Of harm. Of limits. It's the courage to see the systems behind the screens and ask who benefits. Not just in fiction, but in the mirror. By now it's clear, these 5 shorts didn't just make waves, they left craters. In online forums, film journals, animation circles, and academic symposia, the aftermath of Love, Death, and Robots Season 3, Episodes 5 through 9 continues to ripple. And that ripple reveals something telling. Great speculative fiction doesn't just predict the future, it provokes the present. This final chapter explores how these episodes echoed beyond Netflix screens, through memes, think pieces, fan theories, university syllabi, and art exhibitions. Then we close with a few carefully chosen recommendations, films and books that walk the same thematic corridors and might deepen the rabbit hole. Let's start where all modern culture collides, the internet. Hibaro in particular became a cultural wildfire. Within hours of release, it dominated film Twitter, TikTok edits, Reddit AMAs, and YouTube breakdowns. But the reactions weren't just visual praise, they were existential. Viewers debated the gender politics of the siren's gaze. Others saw it as a deconstruction of toxic masculinity. Some even argued that the real antagonist was neither the knight nor the siren, but the economic logic that forced them into violence in the first place. The hashtag Hibaro syndrome trended briefly, used to describe an attraction to beauty that harms you, knowing full well you'll drown. That's what makes it such an unforgettable cultural relic. It didn't just describe a story. It described a psychological state. Swarm inspired a different kind of conversation, ethical debates. Reddit's r/futurology lit up with threads on post-human ethics, hive-based governance, and whether the human race deserves to survive given its colonial DNA. Bioethics professors began referencing Swarm in undergraduate lectures on CRISPR and consent. Meanwhile, Mason's rats took a surprisingly sharp left turn into meme territory. The image of the rat battalion carrying their wounded past a scorched field was turned into a satirical infographic about union workers, insurgents, and underdogs. Within days, labor activists were reposting it as symbolic shorthand for fights against automation. Even Kill Team Kill, the most overtly comedic, ended up weaponized as commentary. The cyberbear was quickly repurposed in satirical political art, symbolizing unchecked military budgets or the rise of autonomous police force proposals. These weren't accidents. These were reflections. Each short gave language, visual or symbolic, to cultural undercurrents people already felt but didn't have metaphors for. In film schools, animation seminars, and critical theory journals, the reception was just as electric, if more granular. Alberto Mielgo's Hibaro became a centerpiece in animation theory classes. Not just for its technical virtuosity, frame rates, motion capture, underwater cinematography, but for how it challenged narrative convention. It became Exhibit A in arguments that animation isn't a genre, it's a medium, capable of expressing emotional experiences no live-action film could touch. In post-colonial studies, Hibaro also sparked fierce debates. Some praised its anti-imperialist allegory. Others critiqued its aesthetics as fetishistic, asking, can a film condemn objectification while indulging in it? Vaulted Halls Entombed found new life in military ethics case studies. The episode's implied critique of mission-first culture became a springboard for classroom discussions about chain of command and moral thresholds. And its cosmic horror lens found resonance in existential risk discourse. How do you prepare for threats you can't imagine? Several philosophy departments cited Swarm in discussions of moral relativism and the paradox of intelligence. The Hive, in some interpretations, isn't just a creature, it's a test. A mirror that asks, what makes your species worth saving? In 2024, the On-Sea International Animation Festival featured a dedicated panel on love, death, and robots, headlined by Tim Miller and Alberto Mielgo. The behind-the-scenes clips from Hibaro's watercam choreography were given standing ovations. But what stole the show was an installation, a room-sized projection of Swarm, where visitors stood inside a 360-degree simulation of the Hive's reproductive chamber, accompanied by whispered Hive-logic phrases sampled from the episode. Meanwhile, AI and art communities latched onto Mason's rats as a case study in the anthropomorphization of labor. In digital art exhibits from Berlin to Sao Paulo, rat characters were reimagined as tech gig workers, complete with badges, metrics dashboards, and rejected health insurance claims. In Vaulted Halls Entombed inspired several VR horror adaptations, one of which was so intense it had to be banned from a UK festival after users reported panic attacks from feeling watched by something that isn't in the game engine. Again, the shorts weren't just being referenced. They were being relived. If these spoke to you, go deeper. Here's a set of carefully chosen films and books that continue the lines of inquiry opened by S03E05, S03E09. These are not obvious picks, they're deep cuts that resonate thematically, philosophically, or emotionally. Films. Aniera 2018, a Swedish existential sci-fi film about a spaceship drifting off course, slowly descending into madness and ritual. Like Swarm, it asks, what does survival mean when the future is gone? Come and see 1985, a brutal anti-war film from Soviet Belarus. Echoes Vaulted Halls in how it strips war of glory and turns obedience into horror. The Congress, 2013, a hybrid live-action/animated film about the commodification of identity and performance. If Hibaro fascinated you, this one may unsettle you even more. The Platform, 2019, a Spanish dystopian thriller that explores class through vertical architecture. Brutal, allegorical, and unblinking like Mason's rats at its darkest. Books. Blood Child by Octavia E. Butler, a short story about interspecies reproduction, control, and consent. The closest literary cousin to Swarm in tone and philosophical weight. The Invention of Morel by Adolfo Bioy Casares, a metaphysical novella about desire, illusion, and replication. Haunting, surreal, and narratively adjacent to Hibaro. The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin, a novel where dreams shape reality and well-intended control spirals into tyranny. Its warning about enforced utopia echoes across all 5 episodes. Caliban and the Witch by Silvia Federici, non-fiction, but a crucial feminist reading of how power and violence shaped modern identity. A sharp lens through which to rewatch Hibaro or Vaulted Halls. We began with spectacle, with bear cannon kills and glitter-drenched sirens. But here's the truth at the bottom of the pool. These weren't just wild stories. They were stress tests. For systems. For ethics. For empathy. Each one asked, what do you do when the tools you built to survive become the very thing that threatens your soul? Each one dared to say, maybe it's already too late. But each one also whispered, not if you're still watching. We were trying to help. Simon Swarm. She didn't sing to me. The night Hibaro. These lines, taken from opposite ends of this 5-episode odyssey, may as well be 2 sides of the same coin, one forged from delusion, the other from denial. They echo like faint apologies across a battlefield where control, desire, and survival have all turned cannibal. The real story these shorts are telling isn't about killer robots, alien hives, or mythic sirens. It's about us. It's about our tendency to mistake complexity for wisdom, to weaponize invention, to extract beauty until it dies in our hands. It's about how progress, without accountability, becomes a self-consuming loop, one we film, stream, meme, and binge-watch. And that's where the mirror cracks. Because while these episodes each work on their own terms, some as satire, some as parable, some as cinematic poetry, together they tell a single, unspoken truth. You're not outside the system. You're inside it. You laughed at the grizzly with a cannon on its back. You stared into the hive's pulsing birth chamber. You rooted for the farmer until the rats buried their dead. You peeked into the tomb and kept watching. You followed the siren into the lake, knowing how it would end. You didn't look away. If the ending feels like drowning, that's the point. There's a reason Hibaro sits at the end of this chain. It's not just a finale, it's a reversal. A narrative Ouroboros. The knight, immune to enchantment, becomes enchanted. The siren, invincible through song, loses her voice. The oppressor and the object switch roles, then switch back again, until identity becomes sludge at the bottom of a blood-red lake. And what does the show give us in the final shot? Nothing clean. No narration. No lesson. Just the weight of silence and the glint of treasure sunk too deep to reach. It's saying, if you're looking for closure, you came to the wrong story. There's one final note that matters, even if it never made the final cut. As confirmed by Tim Miller in off-record interviews and storyboard leaks, the original plan was to connect all 5 shorts through subtle visual thread, a gold insignia or medallion passed from story to story. In Kill Team Kill, it would have hung from the bear's collar. In Swarm, it would have been etched into a fallen civilization's bone architecture. In Mason's Rats, it would have been mistaken for an old war medal. In Vaulted Halls, carved into the vault's lock. In Hibaro, embedded in the siren's chest. Together, they would have formed the Sigil of Control, a symbol meant to represent mankind's obsession with mastering what should be left alone. Why was it cut? Too on the nose, reportedly. Too cinematic universe. But maybe that absence was a gift. Maybe it gave us a space to decode the message ourselves. That what links these stories isn't plot. It's pattern. And pattern is the oldest kind of prophecy. So now we ask not as critics, but as participants. If the knight had walked away, would the siren have ever sung again? If Harper had obeyed the mission, would the gods still be locked up? If Simon had truly listened, before dissecting, could a new kind of future have emerged? And if the rats had never learned to grieve, would Mason have learned to stop killing? But here's the sharpest question of all. What happens to stories when we no longer believe we're immune to them? As the credits roll, no grand theme plays. No voiceover raps in a bow. Just a screen gone dark, the space where meaning echoes longest. So we end not with an answer, but an invitation. In the comments, drop a single emoji that captures what this anthology left inside you. No explanation. No context. Just the shape of the feeling. We'll know. We saw it too.